Welcome back! In this video, we are going to talk about auto layout. Undoubtedly, auto layout is one of the most important features of Figma. Why? Because it allows us to make our frames responsive and make them adapt to different sizes. And if you master how to utilize auto layout in Figma properly, you'll become a much better designer. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know about auto layout, and then we will also try to solve some challenges to really understand how it works. So without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, what's auto layout? Well, auto layout is basically a property that can be added to your frame in order to make it responsive. It's basically the simplest definition of auto layout. So let's start by learning how you can add auto layout to existing elements. Here, as you can see, I have three different text layers. All right, we have title 1, title 2, and title 3. Okay, and they are not placed inside a frame, and that's fine because there are many ways to use auto layout. You can add auto layout directly to these elements, or you can create a frame, add auto layout to it, and then put these elements inside. There is no difference. Okay, it's totally up to you. So let's try the first way. I'm gonna select these titles, hold down the shift key and click on them one by one to select them. And then I'm gonna hit Shift and A on my keyboard. This is the shortcut for adding auto layout to your elements. Hit Shift and A, and you may think that nothing happened. However, something happened. If you take a look at your layers list here, as you can see, we have this new icon, which indicates that this is an auto layout frame now. Keep in mind that it's still a frame, but now we added a new property to it to make it responsive. And also the other thing that has been changed is this section. If you take a look at the design panel, here now we have this auto layout section with all these properties. Okay? In order to remove auto layout from your frame or from your elements, you can simply click on this minus icon right here, and it will be removed from your frame. Okay? Now let me show you the other way you can add auto layout to these frames. Okay? So I'm gonna hit Ctrl-Z or Command-Z to undo the operations. Now I'm gonna create a frame just like this, a simple frame. And I'm gonna add auto layout to this frame first. I'm gonna hit Shift and A, or alternatively, I can just head over to the auto layout section right here and click on this plus icon. Or there is a third way, I can just right click on this frame, and here we have add auto layout. It's totally up to you which option you want to choose. I'm going to click on this plus icon, and now we have an auto layout frame. Now I can go ahead and put these titles inside this frame one by one, just like this. So now again, we have an auto layout frame with all these titles inside. So this is the other way of creating an auto layout frame. But the first way was more efficient, wasn't it? I just wanted to show you there are many different ways you can add auto layout to your elements. Alright, now that you learned how to add auto layout to your frames or to your elements, let's talk about its properties. Auto layout has different properties. If you take a look at the auto layout section right here, you can see that we have these two arrows, which allows us to define the direction of our auto layout, whether we want the elements inside this auto layout frame to be stacked vertically or to be placed next to each other horizontally. Here, as you can see, the horizontal option is selected. That's why these elements inside our auto layout frame are sitting next to each other. If I want them to stack vertically, I can change the direction to vertical, just like this. The next option we have here is this property, horizontal space between items. If you have another direction, the vertical direction, it will be changed to vertical space between items. But basically, it allows you to define the space between the items inside your auto layout frame. At the moment, it's set to 8. You can simply increase it or decrease it, depending on your needs. All right. The other way you can adjust this value is by just hovering over this particular space, and then you'll see these pink handles appear. You can just left click and drag and adjust it. Now let's move on to the next property, which is padding. Here I created a button using auto layout, and if I just select this frame, I can rename it to button as well, and I try to modify these properties, look what happens. This one allows me to modify the vertical padding, and this one allows me to modify the horizontal padding. So just like this, I can adjust the vertical and horizontal padding of my frame. The next property is the alignment. This section allows you to align the elements within your auto layout frame. So here, as you can see, I created 3 different circles, okay? And if I just select them all and I hit Shift and A to add auto layout to them, you see that by default, the alignment is set to top left. Depending on our needs, we can adjust the alignment right here. So here, if I want to align everything to the center, I can just choose this option, and just like that, I can align everything to the center. If I want them to be aligned to the bottom edge of this frame, I can do that as well. All right, now let's move on to the other property. Apart from these properties that you see right here, there are some advanced properties as well. If you just click on this little icon, it opens up an advanced auto layout settings panel, just like this with these options. Let's see what are these options. Here, I'm going to select this frame. This is an auto layout frame, and inside we have 3 different titles, okay? Imagine you want to resize this frame. Look what happens when I do that. You see, these elements stay where they are, so they do not respond to the changes I make to this frame, right? So let's fix this issue. The reason it happens is because here, if we head over to the advanced auto layout settings, we have something called the spacing mode. By default, the spacing mode is always set to packed. That's why when I change the dimension of this frame here, they didn't respond to that change. But to fix this issue, we can change this spacing mode property from packed to space between, and now you may think that nothing happened. However, if you take a look at this property, this horizontal space between items property, you see that there is no fixed value anymore. Now it's set to auto, which means that the spacing between our elements is gonna be automatically adjusted according to the change we make to its parent frame. So now look what happens when I try to modify it. You see that? Okay, now let's move on to the next property. Here, we have another property called strokes. By default, it's set to excluded. We also have this option included. What's the difference between these two? Let me show you the difference. Here we have the exact same frame, but I also added a stroke to it. Okay, so here we have the stroke with the thickness of 17. If I select one of these titles inside and I hold down the Option key or Alt key on my keyboard to check the inner padding, look what we see. You see we get a 46 pixel top and bottom padding. However, if I select this frame and I change this strokes option from excluded to included, now that stroke thickness will be included in the measurements, so it takes up space. That's why this frame got way bigger. Let me just align it to the center. So that's basically the difference between these two modes. Now let's move on to the next property, which is canvas stacking. Here, as you can see, we have this property called canvas stacking, and by default it's set to last on top. We have first on top as well, but nothing changes when I do that. That's because in order to see the effect of this particular property, first you need to make sure that your elements inside your auto layout frame are overflowing. So basically what we need to do is this. We need to select this frame, which includes these 3 images, and then we need to set a negative value for this horizontal spacing property, okay? So here, if I just decrease it just like this, and I specify a negative value, maybe -16, that's exactly what we want. And now we can check out the difference this property makes. Here, if I hover over this, you see in the preview section that the second image in the middle will be placed on top of the first image, and the last image will be placed on top of the second image. So we see the order of these images. That's why here we have last on top. The third one is placed on top of all these images. Now I can change the order to first on top, and look what happens. You see, now the first one is on top of all other images. So that's basically how this property works. Now let's move on to the align text baseline property. So basically, when we try to align different elements in Figma, we align them from the center of their boundary, okay? In this case, we have 3 different text layers. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to select title 3, title 2, and title 1, and I am going to align them vertically. As you can see, they are aligned to the center of this larger title, okay? But it's not always a good way to align your elements this way, especially when you have different elements with different sizes. For example, you have a large text like this, and then you want to align it with a much smaller text. In this case, it's better to align them to their baseline. All right, so let's see how it works. I'm going to select them all and I'm going to add auto layout to them, hit Shift and A. As you can see, they are aligned to the center and that's not good. We want to change that. We want to align them to their baseline. So I'm going to head over to the advanced auto layout settings, and right here, I'm going to enable align text baseline. And when I do that, look what happens. Now these text layers are aligned to the baseline of all these 3 text layers, specifically to the baseline of this larger text layer. All right, so far so good. The last thing we need to talk about is the resizing options. Here I prepared a few examples. Here we have a frame and inside we have a paragraph, this Lorem Ipsum paragraph. All right. If I select this text frame and I try to modify its width, look what happens. You see, nothing happens to the text inside, to the child. So the child doesn't respond to the changes we make to its parent. How can we fix that? The reason it's not responsive is because of its resizing option. Any auto layout frame has both a horizontal resizing option and a vertical resizing option, as you can see here. By default, it's set to hog. Basically, we have hog contents, fixed width, and one more property called fill container. You cannot see it here at the moment, but I'm going to show you in a few seconds. These resizing options allow us to dictate our auto layout frame how to behave, how to respond to the changes we make to its dimension, how its children inside should behave. All right, so what does hog mean? Hog, as you can guess from its name, tries to hog the content inside this auto layout frame. Okay, so keep in mind that both the frame and the children inside, the child element inside, have resizing options. Okay, and depending on our needs, we may modify them. So here, when you see that the frame has this hog resizing option, it means that it's trying to hog the content inside. In this case, it's this text layer. So we don't get any additional space around it, any empty space. The only white space we get around it is the padding we set here. Okay, so if you want to get more empty space around it, you need to adjust the padding just like this. Okay, apart from that, it tries to hog the content inside without leaving any empty space. The other property is fixed width. At the moment, when it's set to hog, you cannot change its width because its width depends on these padding. But sometimes you might need to specify a particular width for an element. In that case, you need to change this property from hog contents to fixed width. As soon as you do that, you can specify the width here, just like this. Okay, and now you get this empty space around your text, but it's still not responsive. So let me change it back to hog content. And now let's see how we can make it responsive. To make it responsive, we need to select the child inside. In this case, it's this text layer. And we need to inspect the resizing options of this particular text layer, the child. So here, as you can see, the resizing option is set to fixed and we have this fixed width. That's why it doesn't respond to the changes we make to the parent element. So to fix that, we can change it to fill container. This is the next property that I was talking about. This property basically tries to take up the whole available space within that parent container. Okay? So if I set it to fill container, you may think that nothing happened. However, now if I select this text frame and I try to adjust its width, look what happens. You see, now the text inside is responsive because the text inside tries to take up the whole available space within this container, within this frame. And if I increase the padding, it will respect these values as well, just like this. I can set it to maybe 32 and 32, just like this. Let's move it up and it will still work just like this. However, now we have much larger padding around it. But what about the vertical option? Well, the vertical option works exactly the same way. So we have hog content fixed height, and for the child inside, we have hog content, fill container, and fixed height. We are not going to adjust them at the moment, but once we start working on a real world project, we will use both of these resizing options to make our whole layout responsive, and you will see the true power of auto layout. Okay, so here I also created this wrapper frame, and inside I placed 3 auto layout frames with different resizing options, so you can truly understand how it works. As you can see, I have this wrapper, and inside we have one frame with the hog resizing option, we have another one with the fixed resizing option, and we have this one with the fill resizing option. Okay, so this last one tries to take up the whole available space within the parent frame, which is this wrapper. This one has a fixed width, so it doesn't matter how big this wrapper gets or how small it gets. And this one always tries to hide the content inside. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to select the wrapper and I'm going to try to modify the width. Look what happens. You see, the last one with the fill container resizing option tries to take up the whole available space always. This one doesn't change because it has a fixed width. This one also doesn't change, but there is a difference between the hog content and this fixed width. Here is the difference. If I change the text of this particular button, look what happens. Let me change it to get us started. You see, it still doesn't change. But if I change the text layer here, look what happens. Get us started. You see, it's responsive because this frame has a hog resizing option. I hope now it's clear how the resizing options work. But if it's not, don't worry because we are going to solve a few challenges so you will comprehend it thoroughly. Alright, here next to these screens, I prepared 5 different challenges for you to solve. Okay? Here we have this simple card. This is basically a frame. It's not responsive. And inside we have this arrow icon. We also have these 2 text layers and this profile image placeholder. Okay? What I want you to do is to make it responsive, fully responsive. As you can see on the screen, when we try to modify the width of this card, the arrow icon should stay on the right side, no matter how big or how small this card gets. The profile image placeholder should stay on the left side, and the padding should be intact. So now I want you to pause the video, don't cheat, pause the video and start making this card responsive by yourself. Once you're done, you can resume and I'll show you how it's done. Alright, I hope you could do it by yourself. I'm pretty sure you could do it, but in case you face some challenges, let me show you how it's done. So here is our main card frame. Here we have the elements inside. Whenever you want to make this pre-designed card, this pre-designed frame responsive, make sure to start from the elements inside. It's much easier to do that. So here what we need to do is combine different auto layouts with different directions, both horizontal and vertical. Yes, it is possible. So here I'm going to select these 2 text layers, the name and the title, hold down the shift key to select them both. And I'm going to add auto layout to them. I'm going to hit shift and A, and now we have the auto layout frame. Let me rename it to text and supporting text. Here I'm not going to change the spacing between them. I already set the spacing. It's 4, that's fine. But what about these 2 elements? You might say that, all right, now we can just select this card and we can add auto layout to it. Let's do that and see what happens. I'm going to hit shift and A. As soon as I do that, the alignment of these elements changes. Why? Because now we have 3 different elements inside this auto layout frame with this particular spacing, 46 pixels in between. But that's not what I want. I want the spacing between these 2 elements to be 12. So how can I do that? Yes, you're right. We need to select these 2 and we need to add auto layout to these 2 elements as well. So let's hit shift and A, and I'm going to rename it to profile and text. just like this. Now let's select the card and add auto layout to it once again, and let's see what other issues we will face. I'm gonna hit Shift and A. So here everything looks good. These two elements stayed on the left side, this one stayed on the right side, but let's see whether it's responsive or not. If I select this card and I try to adjust its width, look what happens. You see, this icon didn't stay right here on the right side, and that's not what I want. I want it to always stay right here, and I want it to maintain the right padding. So its padding should be 16. So how can we fix this issue? Yes, you're right. We can simply change the spacing mode from packed to space between. And now look what happens when I try to modify the width of this card. There it is. This icon stays right here on the right side. So let's analyze it once again to truly understand how it works. Here we have this auto layout frame, the main card, and inside we have two main elements. We have this profile and text frame, which is, by the way, an auto layout frame, and we have this arrow. So when we set the spacing mode of this card frame to auto, it will try to determine the spacing between these two elements automatically, okay? So we don't need to worry about it. It will always stay right on this particular edge. So it tries to push these two elements to the sides, and that's exactly what we need. But I also want to show you something else. Here, if I select this text and supporting text, as you can see, its horizontal resizing is set to hug content. Okay, and that's fine, but sometimes it may be problematic, and that's basically a mistake that many beginners make. So let me show you what's wrong with this. So this frame is trying to hug the content inside, right? If I just select this text and I try to adjust this name, let's just select this whole name, copy it and paste it a few times, and look what happens. You see that? It goes outside the boundary of this card, and basically we don't have any margin between this text layer and this arrow icon, which is not good, okay? To fix this issue, we can basically set a maximum width for this particular element. How? We can change its resizing option, both for the title and the name. I'm gonna select them both, and here, instead of hug, I'm going to change it to fill container, so they try to take up the whole available space within their parent container, which in this case is this text and supporting text frame. And now we need to select this frame, the parent frame, change its resizing option to fill container again. It's also so important. Now this frame is trying to take up the whole available space within its parent frame, which is this profile and text frame. And the last thing we need to do is this. We need to select this profile and text and change its resizing option to fill container. But as you can see here, we still have so much empty space. That's because we didn't modify this particular property for this card frame. If we select the card frame and we try to decrease this value just like this, I'm gonna set it to 12, okay? Now, this profile and text frame is trying to take up the whole available space within its parent frame, and this text and supporting text frame tries to take up the whole available space within this frame, profile and text. And therefore, if I try to change the content here, maybe this text, I'm gonna copy it, paste it a few times, look what happens. You see, it cannot go further. It cannot go beyond the maximum width we set for that. But if we try to adjust the width of this card, just like this, now it has more space, so we can paste it a few times. During this course, we are gonna use auto layout many times, almost for anything. And by the end of this course, I assure you, you'll master how to use auto layout. So don't worry, you just need to give it some time. Okay, now let's move on to the next challenge. So here, I prepared a few items. I prepared these text links, this logo, and this sign in button. So what I want you to do is to create a responsive nav bar, a responsive navigation bar. These menu items should always stay together right at the center. This logo should always stay on the left side of that frame, and this sign in button should always stay on the right side. So please pause the video, go ahead and try to solve this challenge, and then you can resume and we will move on. All right, I hope you could do it by yourself. Now let me show you how it's done. So it's quite simple, just like what we did here. We need to start by selecting the elements inside our main frame. Here I didn't create any frame intentionally. And then we need to select all the main elements and put them inside an auto layout frame. So let's get started. First, I'm going to select these menu items, hold down the shift key and just click on them one by one. I'm going to add auto layout to them, hit shift and A, and I'm going to rename it to menu items. All right, cool. So now we have this button, this menu items frame, and this logo. And that's basically all we need. So now we can select them all and add auto layout to these three elements. Hit shift and A, and let's rename it to navbar. All right, so let's see whether our navbar is responsive or not. As you can see, it's not. And that's expected because we didn't modify any of the auto layout properties. So let's fix this issue. As I said, this logo should always stay on the left side. This sign in button should always stay on the right side. And these menu items should stay together right at the center of this navbar. So basically the spacing between these elements should be automatically adjusted. So you know what to do. You just need to change its spacing mode from packed to space between, and now it will be responsive. You can also add a fill to it here. I'm gonna hit this plus button right here in the fill section to add a background color to it. And I'm gonna change the color to something like this so you could see the button and also all these elements. However, we don't have any padding, so we can set the horizontal padding to maybe 48. As you can see, these elements on the sides have been pushed towards the center, and the vertical padding can be 16, just like this. And now let's give it a try once again. As you can see, it's fully responsive, and that's exactly what we needed. Okay, now let's move on to the next challenge. So here I prepared 3 different cards. Okay, and inside we have an icon, we have this text layer, and these are auto layout frames, as you can see here, and they are fully responsive. What I want you to do is to put them inside another frame. You can give that frame a background color, you can add a fill to it or not, it really depends on you. But what I want you to achieve is to make the cards inside that parent frame responsive. So basically the cards inside should take up the whole available space of its parent. And when you adjust the dimensions of the parent element, the parent frame, the cards inside should be resized as well, both vertically and horizontally. It's so important. So please pause the video and start working on it. So let's see how it's done. First of all, I'm going to select all these cards. I'm going to add auto layout to them, hit shift and A, and let me rename it to wrapper. Just like this. So we have the wrapper parent frame, and then inside we have these child items. So I'm going to select this wrapper and I'm going to give it a fill. I'm going to add a fill to it. It could be white or any other color. And also I'm going to add some padding to it. I'm going to set the horizontal and vertical padding to 16, just like this. And I can just increase the corner radius value as well. I'm going to set it to 16, just like that. So now if I select this wrapper and I try to change its dimension, nothing happens, both vertically and horizontally. So these cards are not responsive. What should I do? Yes, you're right. We need to select the child items inside, the children inside, and then we need to change the resizing options to fill its container, which is this parent. So we can select these elements one by one, or you can just select one of them, hold down the shift key and just click on this last element to select them all. Or you can select this frame and hit enter, and Figma will select all the elements inside this particular frame. Now, as you can see, the resizing option of these cards is set to fixed. So we are going to change it to fill container. And if I select the wrapper and I try to modify its width, as you can see, now they are responsive. But what about the vertical resizing option? Because it's not responsive yet. For that, we need to again select all these cards inside this wrapper. And this time we need to change the vertical resizing option to fill container. If I select the wrapper now it's responsive both ways. All right, cool. Now let's move on to the next challenge. So here I prepared a few squares just like this. And basically we have 3 groups of cards here. The yellow one, the pink one, and the blue one. What I want you to achieve is to put them inside another frame, and I want you to make them responsive, but in a particular way. This time, the yellow and the blue group should be fluid, so their dimension, their width, not their height, only their width, should be changed according to the changes we make to its parent frame, as you can see right here on the screen. But the pink group should have a fixed width. Okay, so please pause the video and do that, and we'll do it together after that. So the first thing we need to do is group these cards based on their color. So I'm gonna select these yellow cards, I'm gonna hit Shift and A, and let's call it yellow. I'm gonna select these pink cards, hit Shift and A, and call it pink. And finally, I'm gonna select these blue cards, hit Shift and A, and I'm gonna call it blue. All right, now I'm gonna select these 3 auto layout frames, and I'm gonna add auto layout to them to put them inside another frame. So hit Shift and A, and I'm gonna call it wrapper. Just like this. Obviously, at the moment, it's not responsive. Nothing changes when I modify the width. So let's go ahead and fix that. As I said, this pink group, these pink cards, should have a fixed width. So what we should do is select this pink frame, and we need to change its resizing option from hog content to fixed width. But what about these two? I'm gonna select this yellow and this blue, and here, as you can see, they are hogging the content, okay? So instead of hogging the content, I want them to take up the whole available space within the wrapper. So I'm gonna change it to fill container, and now let's select the wrapper and try to modify the width and see whether it works or not, whether we are done or not. Look what happens. You see, it doesn't behave properly. So we need to do one more thing. We need to select the items inside these fluid, or let's say responsive groups, the yellow and blue frames, and we need to change their resizing option as well. So I'm gonna select the yellow frame, hold down the Control key, select the blue frame, hit Enter to select the cards inside, and here, as you can see, the resizing option is set to fixed. We need to change it to fill container. Now, if I select the wrapper and I try to modify that, look what happens. You see, these cards, the yellow cards and the blue cards, are responsive, but these pink cards have a fixed width, and that's exactly what we needed. All right, now let's move on to the last challenge, which is basically the most complicated one. Here, as you can see, we have a card with a thumbnail, with profile image, with a few text layers, some tags, a divider, a play icon, and here we have also this small text layer. And here on the left side, you see all these elements separately. Now I want you to go ahead and recreate this card and make it fully responsive, just like what you see on the screen. Okay, so when you adjust the dimensions of your card, the elements inside should respond to it as well. So pause the video, go ahead and prepare that, and we will do it together afterwards. All right, were you able to recreate this card? I know it's a little bit challenging, but that's fine. If you could do it without any issues, it means that you truly understood how auto layout works, and that's amazing. So now let's do it together. We have all the elements. We have the thumbnail, we have the profile image, all these text layers. The thumbnail should be placed right at the top, just like this. Then right underneath, we need to have the profile image, as you can see here. We need to have these text layers, and then we need to have these tags sitting next to each other. Then the divider and these two elements should sit next to each other as well. So let's see how we can create that. First, I'm gonna select these text layers, okay, these 3, and I'm gonna add auto layout to them, hit Shift and A. I'm gonna align everything to the left, just like that. And also, I'm gonna decrease the vertical spacing between them. I'm gonna decrease it to 4. Just like this, and let's place it right there. Now let me rename this new auto layout frame to text. Now I'm gonna hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and select the profile image as well, while this text auto layout frame is selected. I'm gonna hit Shift and A and put them inside another frame. and I'm gonna rename it to profile and text. The spacing between them can be increased, just like what we have here. I'm gonna increase it to 16. Okay, so far so good. So we have our profile and text frame, we have our thumbnail. Now let's go ahead and select these tags, and I'm gonna add auto layout to them, hit Shift and A, and I'm gonna rename it to tags. The spacing between them should be decreased. I'm gonna decrease it to 4, and I'm gonna move them up just like this. Here is our divider. We can just place it right there. What about these two? Since they should sit next to each other, I'm gonna select them both, and I'm gonna hit Shift and A to add auto layout to them, and I'm gonna call it action and time, and let's place it right here. However, here we have an issue. As you can see, all these elements, the text, these tags, the divider, the button, and this bottom group should be aligned to the left, right? But here we cannot do that because we put the profile image and these text inside one frame. So what we can do is this. We can just bring this avatar out. So here we should just have a text frame. We can just select this profile and text frame, right click on it, click on ungroup to just remove that parent frame. So now we have the text frame, and we can just select all these elements, the text, the tags, the divider, and this action and time frame, and I'm gonna add auto layout to them. Hit Shift and A, just like this. Now as you can see, they are perfectly aligned to the left, and I'm gonna set the spacing between them to 16, and now I'm gonna rename this frame to content. And finally, I can hold down the Shift key and select this profile image and add auto layout to them. Hit Shift and A. Now we can set the spacing between these two frames to 16. Just like this, we could create this structure. Let's rename this to card content. Okay, cool. So we have our card content. We also have this thumbnail. Now we need to select them both. We need to add auto layout to them. So hit Shift and A, just like that. And let's call it card. I'm gonna add a field to it, so let's just click on this plus icon right here, but we don't have any inner padding, so while this card frame is selected, I'm gonna increase its horizontal and vertical padding, just like this. I'm gonna set it to maybe 12 and 12. We can also make it rounded, so let's increase the corner radius to 24, and our card is ready. However, it's not responsive. Before we try to make it responsive, I'm gonna deal with one issue here. I'm gonna select this content frame inside this card content, and I'm gonna decrease this spacing from 16 to 12. I think 16 was too much. Now it looks much better. Now let's go ahead and make it responsive. What do we need? We need the thumbnail inside to be responsive, so it should take up the whole available width of this card. So what I'm gonna do is this. I'm gonna select this thumbnail, and I'm gonna change its resizing option to fill container. Now if I select the card and I try to resize it, it tries to fill the container, and that's exactly what we need. What about these? Well, as for this card content, we can do the exact same thing. We can just select this card content and set its resizing option to fill container like this. So it tries to fill the container, but we should also go ahead and select this content inside, change its resizing option to fill container, and also this text frame, change it to fill container, and all the elements inside this text frame, just select them all, change them to fill container, and you can also select this tags frame and change it to fill container, just like this. This one is not necessary because we know that we are not going to add more actions to this. Okay, so now let's go ahead and give it a try and see whether it's responsive or not. As you can see, it's fully responsive. So now let me go ahead and modify this text and see what happens if we have some additional text here. I'm going to copy it and just paste it a few times. As you can see, it's responsive vertically as well. And that's exactly what we need. I'm gonna select the card now and I try to resize it. It's fine, but we have two issues here. First, we need to select our divider and we need to change its resizing option. As you can see, it's set to fixed. It should be fill container, just like that. And also our tags go outside the boundary of our card. How can we fix that issue? Unfortunately, at the moment, we cannot fix this issue because basically we need to have two different auto layout frames, one vertical and one horizontal. And when we decrease the width of this card, it should switch to a vertical frame, which is not possible basically. But usually when we design cards, we design it for desktop, we design it for tablets and mobile separately, okay? So we change the layout manually, not using auto layout. So it's not gonna be problematic. All right, before we wrap up this video, I wanna talk about one more thing, one other feature of auto layout that we didn't talk about. Imagine you wanna put something right here at the corner, okay? Maybe a badge. I'm gonna just create a badge here, maybe using a polygon. Let me just create a polygon, increase the sides just like this. Something like that should work. I'm going to make it a little bit rounded. And also I'm going to change its color to maybe this blue. Okay, so here is going to be our badge. Imagine you want it to stay right here. When I try to put it inside this frame, it tries to push the content down. So it's basically part of the flow. That's not what I want. I want it to float right here. So it shouldn't take up any space. To do that, we need to use a feature called absolute position. Once it's inside your card frame, you need to select it and you need to head over to the design panel. And right here, we have this little icon which says absolute position. When I click on it, now as you can see, it's not taking up any space. It's not part of the flow. So it's basically floating and I can place it wherever I want. So I'm going to place it right here. I can make it a little bit larger maybe. And now if I select the card and I try to adjust its dimension, look what happens. You see it doesn't stay right there. That's because we need to set some constraints for it. We didn't talk about constraints yet. We will in detail, but basically constraints allow us to make something stick to the top, to the right, to the bottom, or to the left of our parent edges. Sometimes we can also set it to center. We will talk about it later, but for now, I'm gonna select this badge and I want you to head over to the constraints section. Here by default, it's set to top and left. I'm going to set it to top and right because I want it to stay on the right side, on the top right corner of this card always. Now, if I select the card and I try to modify that, look what happens. It stays right here at the corner. Alright guys, that's all for this lesson. I know it was a lot, but believe me, it's so important to master auto layout. And later when we start working on a project together, you will see how important it is to master these tools and to practice these features. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and if you faced any issues or if you have any questions, make sure to let me know. I'll try my best to get back to you as soon as possible. So I'll see you in the next one.